All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Virtual Bighorn Hunt Seminar, and congrats on drawing your sheep tag. My name is Sarah Hale. I'm the game biologist out of Battle Mountain, and I'll go ahead and be kicking off the festivities tonight. Next slide, please, Mike. We're going to cover a range of topics, including how to estimate age and size from a distance and what views are best to do so. But our main objective tonight is to ensure that you have a safe, enjoyable, and successful hunt. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of the topics we're going to cover before we move on to the practice session we'll do on aging and scoring bighorn. We've got several biologists in attendance, wardens and taxidermists, who will be covering each topic separately, and they will introduce themselves as their sections begin. Also, behind the curtain, we have our Eastern and Southern Region Game Division supervisors, Tom Donham and Joe Bennett, who will be manning the Q&A. So don't hesitate to submit all your questions to them throughout the presentation. And we will go ahead and begin with a brief history of bighorn in the state of Nevada. Next slide, please. So prior to European settlement, the Nevada bighorn population was estimated at 30 to 50,000 individuals. However, during the mid to late 1800s, large mining and railroad towns began to spring up throughout the state, and this presented a variety of challenges to wildlife. First, wildlife's access to water was greatly restricted, as human settlements were typically built near important water sources. And second, the large populations of miners, railroad workers, and settlers participated in unregulated harvest of big game species for food, and this included bighorn. Next slide, please. And finally, associated with humans, a large number of domestic livestock was introduced onto the landscape. At the turn of the century, it's estimated that there were over 2.5 million domestic sheep and hundreds of thousands of cattle in Nevada, which resulted in intense competition for resources such as food, water, and space in areas occupied by bighorn, and the introduction of novel diseases that wild sheep had never been exposed to, thus had no ability to fight off. Next slide, please. There's the picture. And this is just showing an interaction, a recent interaction of domestic and wild sheep in Nevada. Disease is believed to be the main factor that eliminated bighorn from most of their historic range. After the introduction of novel disease, all species of bighorn sheep in the northern 2/3 of the state became extirpated or locally extinct, and only about 15 mountain ranges in central and southern Nevada remained occupied by desert bighorn. And by 1960, it's estimated that Nevada's bighorn population was at its lowest point, with less than 3,000 individuals remaining on the landscape. And this will bring us to our next section on bighorn management.
Hi, so my
Hunter,
name,
hang on,
Yep.
Hunter. Want to make sure people know that if you have a question, there's a Q&A that you can type in your questions, and so don't be bashful to type anything in there that you've got a question on. Thanks, Hunter.
yeah. So my name is Hunter Burkett. I am the Tonopah game biologist, and I'll continue the presentation with bighorn management. The main goal with these capture methodologies, which I'll dive into, was to reestablish bighorn sheep to their native range. So the use of drop nets in the early 1980s and 1990s helped provide a source stock for many of our transplants in the early years. And drop net is still applicable and a very useful method. So a site is typically baited for many days, and sheep are made to become used to human presence. A large net is strung up, and a release mechanism is typically done with blasting caps, or most recently electromagnetic releases. A group of volunteers will wait adjacent to the net, and once that net is released, they'll make their way quickly over to the capture site, hobble and restrain the sheep. So this method, while time consuming, it is time consuming, and you can't quite be as selective with the animals that you're targeting. So in the next slide, we're going over net gunning, which is a technique we use in more modern times. So in this short little video clip, let's see if it can play for us. So in this little clip here, here we're using a contract crew via helicopter who captures these sheep with a net gun. Some of the benefits to using a net gun is the use of these capture crews, because they have a great experience handling thousands of animals and are very well trained. Capture crews have also created techniques to avoid capture-related injuries. Animals are typically only allowed to be chased for a certain period of time and are aimed to be netted while moving uphill, which prevents injuries and large falls. It's a much more efficient way to capture animals. We can capture animals in a quicker time period. It doesn't involve weeks of preparation like the drop net. And we can be much more selective in the animals we're harvesting. We can pick out specific animals, and they're much more easily captured this way. So animals are hobbled and blindfolded by a mugger who's in that helicopter, and they're put into a transport bag. And the sheep is then slung from the belly of the helicopter after it's hooked to the belly of a helicopter and flown down to a base camp, which we'll talk about on our next slide. So base camp, when that animal is slung to this base camp, there's a specific landing zone that's predetermined by the area biologist and the capture planning crew. Veterinarians, biologists, and volunteers will help assess vital rates. They'll cool down the animal, collect samples that are important to assess the animal's health. And it's at this point that we attach a GPS collar and ear tags. The sheep on the table being processed, it's a very short period of time, typically 5 to 10 minutes. And then they're moved into a transport trailer, which is on our next slide. So here is one of our transport trailers. They're modified to transport wildlife and can transport up to 30 bighorn sheep. As you can see, they're greatly improved and modified over time. We have here a 2-deck system where rams are placed on the top deck and ewes and lambs on the bottom deck, which prevents injuries that could occur throughout transport. So on the next slide, this is a great slide that shows the tremendous successes we've had in our Bighorn translocation program in cooperation with our NGO partners. So the total number of bighorn sheep that have been translocated are here: Desert Bighorn, approximately 2,100, California Bighorn, 1,023, Rocky Mountain Bighorn, 326, which gives us a grand total of 3,460, which is a total of 68 mountain range within Nevada. What's also been great is we've been able to help restore bighorn sheep habitat in adjacent and neighboring states, sharing 641 desert and 139 California bighorn sheep. So it's just been a tremendous successful program. So in this next slide, we're going to look at historic distribution throughout time of bighorn sheep in Nevada. So on the left-hand slide in the blue is the likely historic bighorn sheep distribution in 1860, which is prior to those impacts Sarah mentioned before. Nearly all mountain ranges in Nevada held a bighorn sheep population with varying degrees of density. So in the center green here, we have a map of the remnant bighorn sheep populations in Nevada. which were approximately only 15 ranges at that time. And this is in the 1960s. And those ranges were in the central and southern portions of Nevada. In the right, in the magenta color, we have our current distribution of bighorn sheep in Nevada. We've realized great benefits from these trap and transplant programs, and repatriated bighorn sheep into absent mountain ranges from anthropogenic disturbances. Also, it's nice to mention that some of these bighorn sheep populations are also pioneering herds who have reestablished themselves into historic habitat. In the next slide, we're going to look at a more coarse scale map of the entire West, the historic distribution of bighorn sheep. And we lost over 95% of our bighorn sheep through those anthropogenic disturbances. And some states completely lost their bighorn sheep populations. So as you can see over time, it's a great little GIF. So here's another map breaking up the subpopulations of bighorn sheep in Nevada. So we have in the upper left-hand corner in Washoe and Humboldt County, in that magenta color, are California bighorn sheep populations. In the northeast corner of Nevada are Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep populations, and then the central and southern portions of Nevada are desert bighorn sheep populations. And that cream color displayed on this map is also the potential bighorn sheep ranges we could potentially transport bighorn sheep into. So this is a pretty neat graph depicting population estimates of those three subspecies I just mentioned before, and their trend over time since 1965. So in the orange, we have our desert bighorn sheep population. In the yellow, our California bighorn sheep population. And in the blue, our Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep population. And those green dots are the statewide RAM tag totals each year following that population trends. So Nevada has experienced these tremendous growths in bighorn sheep populations, which peaked in 2019 and with 12,500 bighorn sheep. And we've been declining since then slightly to our 2022 estimate of 10,300 bighorn sheep. So even with the declines in recent years, Nevada still provides more RAM tags than any other state in the lower 48. In the next slide, we're going to go over our helicopter surveys. NDOW conducts aerial helicopter surveys with our own pilots and our own helicopters to monitor bighorn health, numbers, and distribution, as well as habitat conditions on the landscape, water availability to bighorn and other wildlife. So an area biologist will classify bighorn sheep into age and sex classifications, which help inform our population models that indicate trends in specific herds. So in that upper image is a photo of one of our older helicopters we've used for surveys. And that lower image is a helicopter that we're currently using for aerial survey. So on to harvest management strategies. Since 1996 in all units, and all bighorn sheep units in Nevada, we have an any ram regulation. Historically, in 1952, we had a 3/4 curl minimum. In 1966, there was an instituted minimum 144-inch Boone and Crockett or 7-year-old minimum. In the 80s, there were some areas that varied with ram harvest strategy, with some areas with an any ram harvest strategy because of Rocky and California residing in those units. So we have a very conservative harvest that's directed to harvest mature rams, and we strive for an average harvested age of 6 years or greater in each management unit. And we attempt to remove any unnecessary regulations or restrictions on sportsmen And to mention, we first added our bighorn sheep U tags in 2014 to help reduce herds that have reached a nutritional carrying capacity of the habitat, but were possibly or previously exposed to disease, and that makes them unsuitable for translocation. And another thing to mention, this year we initiated an inaugural one-horned ram hunt, which increased hunter opportunity as well. In the next slide, we're going to go over a very important aspect of bighorn sheep management in Nevada, which is our water development program. So Nevada is the driest state in the union, making water availability vital for big game management. In many of our Nevada mountain ranges, water is the limiting factor for bighorn sheep. So in these cases, to expand bighorn sheep populations, we develop artificial water developments. And these developments are called guzzlers. So through 2022, with the help of our partners, Nevada Department of Wildlife has built 209 guzzlers in Nevada specifically for bighorn sheep, but other wildlife use it as well. 182 of those guzzlers are specifically for desert bighorn sheep, 25 of those for California bighorn sheep, and 2 for Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. Guzzlers are made up of a large apron that captures rainfall or snowfall, and that apron's made out of metal, slick rock, or heavy-duty tarps. And this water is then gravity fed, piped down to large water holding tanks and filtered, and then piped out to a drinker. So over time, water development programs evolves, and construction methods and materials continue to improve into current day systems, where we have in this picture a self-leveling system, and some of our newer guzzlers have storage capacities of 7,000 to over 12,000 gallons, depending on how many water holding tanks are available. An important thing to mention is please contact the Nevada Department of Wildlife if you find any guzzler that's incredibly low, has an incredibly low water level, or is in need of repair. And please don't attempt to repair the guzzler yourself. A biologist or a member of the guzzler crew will tend to the issue as quickly as possible. So moving on to the next slide. In recent years, NDOW, with partner of NGOs, have conducted many water hauls due to extreme drought conditions and lack of midsummer monsoonal precip to several guzzlers. Thank God for this incredibly wet summer in southern and central Nevada. We've really desperately needed it. So with these unprecedented drought conditions in the last few years, in 2020 and through 2020 and 2021, we hauled a total of 160,000 gallons. In June of 2021, we hauled a total of 71,000 gallons. And this spring 2022, before we received all this monsoonal precip, we hauled a total of 30,800 gallons. So on to the next slide. We'd be incredibly remiss if we didn't express our gratitude towards our partners. So many different land management agencies, NGOs, volunteers have been critical to the success of Bighorn Sheep Reintroduction Program, our water development program, and our most recent water hauls. We could not have had these expansive populations without them. So with that, I'll pass the baton off to Daniel.
Hello, everybody. I'm Daniel Slee. I'm the game biologist out of the Panaca office. I manage most of the bighorn sheep populations in Lincoln County. And today I'm going to talk to you about the biology and habitat of bighorn sheep in Nevada. So to start off the bat, we're just going to first talk about the diet of bighorn sheep. They are obviously herbivores. They eat vegetation. They prefer to consume grasses and forbs at closer to the ground. But they do inhabit shrubby and even treed areas as well. So they'll make use of whatever vegetation is within their preferred habitat, but you'll oftentimes find them feeding out on grassy slopes. On the next slide, we're going to talk about ewe and young ram groups. So bighorn sheep are pretty social animals. You usually find them in groups. During the rut, you can find mature rams and ewes together, but during most other times of the year, ewes segregate themselves into groups, and mature rams use different habitat types in their own social groups. As you can see here, this group consists mainly of ewes and a couple lambs and a immature ram that's about 3 years old. So during non-rut timeframes, this will be a typical ewe group you'll find on the landscape. And as you can see, this ram looks pretty big relative to the other ewes. It's a lot bigger bodied, bigger horned, but that's just because it's next to a lot of ewes. This isn't really a big ram and it's immature. So it just goes to show the importance of looking over a lot of sheep and paying attention later in this presentation when we talk about aging and scoring characteristics. So ewes generally live to about 14 years old, about their average lifespan in the wild. We have had some ewes recorded up to 18 years old, which is an exceptionally old animal. So they are longer lived than a lot of other similar sized animals such as mule deer or pronghorn, which is pretty unique. On the next slide, we'll talk about ram groups. So rams don't live as long as ewes. For the most part, they are usually top out around 10 years or so of age due to fighting, and the stress of the rut puts on them makes them more susceptible to predators and malnutrition during the winter. But there have been some exceptional circumstances. A few years ago, a ram was harvested with an ear tag, and we looked back in our records, and that ram received the ear tag when it was younger. So it was pretty much a known age ram, and it was 16 years old at harvest. So there are some exceptional circumstances, but rams typically top out around 10 years old. Rams will live in groups of about 2 to even upwards of 80. Here is this group you can see here on Table Mountain, I believe. So if you're hunting an area not during the rut, you'll want to look for these groups of mature rams. They'll typically be in more rugged or higher habitat than ewes. And you want to look over a lot of different animals. As you can see here, this ram group in the front has a lot of different age classes of animals. The third one from the right appears to be about a 2-year-old. So that's about the size of that ram in the previous photo. So as you can see, it doesn't look big at all when it's around other mature rams, which is why it's so important to look over a lot of sheep and really pay attention to characteristics that we'll go over later to ensure that you're finding a mature animal and a good trophy to harvest. The rams will intermingle with ewe groups during the rut. And the rut is pretty variable in Nevada, even within subspecies. But typically, California and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep tend to rut around November, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later, but really around November is going to be the prime rut time for California and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. Desert bighorn sheep, in contrast, have pretty variable time frame. They can start as early as August and September in more southern units, and up in other units, more northern, they can rut as late into November or December. So it'll really depend on where you are and what the herd is doing for if you'll be looking for mature ram groups or rams intermixed with ewes. On the next few slides, we'll talk about different habitat types sheep like to use. So this photo is in the Ruby Mountains, I believe, or East Humboldt's. But this is pretty typical Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep habitat. You have grasses and forbs for the sheep to consume, and you have snow melt, and there's probably a spring up in there for water. And then what's most important for bighorn sheep is escape terrain. When bighorn sheep run away from predators, they don't go into trees or other things like mule deer, elk. They run up into pretty rugged, rocky, sheer habitat types to get up above and evade predators. So you're going to want to look for areas with water, food, and escape terrain when you're hunting bighorn sheep. So if you find a place like this with a Rocky Mountain bighorn tag, you'd want to spend quite a bit of time glassing. On the next slide, we're going to talk about California bighorn habitat. This is in the Santa Rosa range. And as you can see, there's a lot more shrubs. There's a lot of sagebrush, maybe some bitter brush in there. So the sheep will make use of this habitat. They'll eat the grasses, the bunch grasses in between the shrubs, and even the shrubs themselves. But as you can see, there's rocky escape terrain throughout this whole area. And there's probably a spring or a creek down in the bottom for water. So these are, so habitat for bighorn sheep is going to vary by subspecies, but you're looking for these three main components. And on the next slide, we're going to go over desert bighorn sheep habitat. This is in the sheep range in southern Nevada. And as you can see, it's quite a bit drier than the other habitat types, but it has some shrubs and some grasses interspersed for sheep to eat. And it's pretty rugged, rocky escape terrain. And you can see on that talus rocks, there's sheep trails that go across it. So we know that bighorn sheep do like this habitat. So these are just some areas that you should focus on when hunting bighorn sheep. And I believe now we'll be talking about law enforcement, so I'll pass the baton.
Hello, my name is Mike McCusker. I'm a game warden out of the Reno area. I'm going to cover some, I don't know, choice, a very select few regulations, hopefully to help you have a once in a lifetime hunt that doesn't end in a bad encounter with a game warden. So first of all, I'd like to say, please check your tags. Very simple thing to do, but a lot of us put in for 5 choices. You assume you drew X when you really drew Y. Double, triple check your tag to make sure what unit you have. And then check the hunting maps to make sure you're familiar with those boundaries on where your unit is, what tag you drew. Very common mistake. I shouldn't say common, but it does occur and it's very easily avoidable. Secondly, take out that hunt book and get past, where it lists all the numbers of people that you're going to competing against, and go to the back of the book and check out those regs. Pretty much everything you need to know is in that regulation book, and the information's right there. Please, if you have questions, even despite this this seminar, if you have a question, it's always best to call ahead first and ask that question, and we can help you out. First of all, aircraft and flying. So it's against the law to use aircraft for the purposes of hunting, and that begins July 1 and ends February 28th of the year. This also includes drones. Drones have become a very big part of our tech world nowadays, but this also includes the use of drones. You're not allowed to use a drone on your hunt, not to film any part of it or anything like that. Can't harass animals, any of that stuff. So just avoid that a little bit. Go ahead, Mike. Guides. So very advantageous to hire a guide if you have the resources to do so. But please check, the guides are licensed through us. They're also permitted through the land management agencies throughout the state. Please check to make sure your guide is licensed. You're not going to insult him by asking to see his license and to see his permits for whatever units you have. A lot of people get hung up in this, and you can also, you yourself, by hiring an unlicensed guide, you could be, there's a misdemeanor crime potentially against you if you hire a guide that isn't licensed. So make sure they're licensed. Ask for their permits from the different land management agencies, BLM, Forest Service, what have you. So just double check on that just to keep yourself safe. Go ahead, Mike. So OHV laws, in case you've been living under a rock, you know that we are now required to license our OHVs, ATVs, UTVs in the state of Nevada. Beyond that, if you have a tag that is in one of the National Park Service units or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service units, they have different OHV laws. They're more restrictive with besides being registered, they have to be like street legal with lights and mirrors and the whole thing. If you plan on using an OHV in a unit that is controlled by Park Service or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, please contact them direct to see what their requirements are. There's also issues with going on and off roads in those different areas as well that have more restrictions, especially on Park Service. So please check that out before you go if you have a unit that encompasses some of that land. So Hunter touched on this earlier, but if you're out and about in one of these sheep units and you see a guzzler, go check it out. That's fine. We need to know if it's broken or it's empty or anything else. Do not try to fix it yourself. Do not obstruct it. Do not manipulate it in any way. You can't mess with it. Just give us a call. We'd be more than happy to come out and fix it and get some water in it if it's dry. So that's information we need to know, but by all means, do not interfere, manipulate the guzzler whatsoever. Go ahead, Mike. So use of trail cameras. Again, this law is fairly new within the last, 3 or 4 years, but it is unlawful to use trail cameras in the state of Nevada beginning August 1st of every year through the end of December. If it's a game camera that's capable of transmitting a picture like through cell service, you can't use those after July 1. But your standard trail cameras where you go get the card out of it, those have to be off the landscape by August 1 through the end of December. So if you do have one out there, you best exit the seminar and go pick it up before the game warden gets you. So weapons. I don't know who has what tags, but most of the tags are any legal weapon tags. There are archery tags out there as well. But if yours is an any legal weapon tag, you can use anything from, we typically call it a rifle tag, but you can use a rifle, a muzzle loader. You can use a crossbow. You could use archery equipment. You could use handguns, all within specific parameters. If you have an archery tag, then of course you're limited to archery only. As far as loaded weapons go in the state of Nevada, the way the state of Nevada defines a loaded weapon, and this has to deal with long guns, a loaded long gun in the state of Nevada is an unexpended round in the chamber. Okay, that's our definition of loaded for the state. You cannot have a loaded weapon in a vehicle at any time. And this includes ATVs, motorcycles, etc. Some people forget about that, but that is a vehicle. No loaded weapons, no unexpended round in the chamber when it's in or upon your vehicle. You also cannot shoot from or across a road. This doesn't encompass most 2-track roads, but any road that has regular maintenance. If it's been graded or improved, then that definitely holds true. But do not shoot from or across the road. Step outside, get away from the vehicle if you're close to one. Also, National Park Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have a different definition of a loaded weapon. So for them, it is, you can't have any live ammunition in the gun whatsoever. So if you have a magazine or whatever, no loaded rounds in the gun whatsoever. The ammunition and weapons have to be totally separate in your vehicle. Once you're out on the ground, then that's fine, but nothing in the vehicle that can't be together. Go ahead, Mike. So radio telemetry and satellite collars. Many sheep out on the landscape do have radio collars that were put on by us. It is lawful for you to shoot one. It might make your biologist a little antsy, but it is lawful for you to shoot one. There are 2 caveats there. You cannot use a radio signal from a wildlife for a wildlife caller to track or pursue an animal. So very difficult to do, but it's possible. You cannot use some receiver device to track an animal and then hunt it. Also, know as well that once, if you do shoot an animal with a satellite collar on it, it is property of the State Department of Wildlife, and you have to return that to the department. You can't keep it. So go ahead, Mike. So mistakes or violations. Mistakes happen, we get that. But if something happens in the field, it's better to stop what you're doing and get in touch with one of us. And these are circumstances like, you know, you shot two animals, you wounded an animal, or, you know, unintentionally, anything like that. It's better to stop what you're doing, get in touch with us, and we'll come out and deal with the situation. It's better to take that route than to try to cover up that mistake. If we find out about it then it just makes things worse. So you don't want to go there. If a mistake happens, or you notice any violations in the field, let us know. You guys are our eyes and ears out there. There's very few of us in the state, and we rely on you guys to give us the insight on what's going on out there. So waste and duty to pursue. So Nevada has a law that if you take a shot at an animal, you just can't go, oh, I missed, I'm going back to my truck and I'm done. You have the responsibility by law to pursue that animal. It's a reasonable pursuit of that animal. There's no real definition besides that reasonableness. You know, do everything in your power to recover that animal. You can't just take a shot, head back to the vehicle and be done. Oh, I missed. Go check up on it, see if there's any blood, any hair, track it, do your due diligence, and everything should work out there. Go ahead, Mike. So you have on your tag, there's actually four portions. Top portion is the actual tag portion. The second portion down is a transportation permit. Third portion down is the taxidermy stub, and then usually it comes with your license reprinted on that bottom portion. Once you reach your down game, first make sure it's dead, do your congratulations, but before anything starts, punch that tag. And we use that term punch. What you've noticed with today's tags, it's a little hard to punch them. Best thing to do is, you know, all the dates and stuff are on the outside, the outer rim of the tag. Notch it with the tip of a knife, do it on something hard, not your leg or anything else that you might puncture, but just notch out the month, the date, and the sex of the animal. And then you have to attach that tag to the carcass once you reach your mode of transportation of your camp, whichever's first. But that tag portion goes with the carcass. Your taxidermy portion goes with the head. So keep that tag with the meat, and then your taxidermy portion goes with your head if you're taking that to a taxidermist or anything else. Go ahead, Mike. I mentioned the transportation permit. That's that middle portion on your tag. It requires, if anybody but the lawful hunter tag holder is transporting that animal, they need to fill out this transportation permit. And what it requires is the person who harvested the animal to sign it in your driver's license. The person who's transporting has to do the same. And then the third independent witness has to also do the same. And then that other person can transport your animal out of the camp. Say you wanted to stick around or something. Also, your guide is allowed. If you hire a guide, the guide can transport your animal without the need of the transportation permit. So there is a mandatory check-in with the skull and horns of any rams that are killed. It is mandatory within 5 business days of your harvest. So keep that in mind. Know that the requirement is for the tag holder, the hunter, to personally present that animal at one of our offices. It can't be your wife, your buddy who was on the hunt. The hunter, the tag holder himself has to bring that animal in. So, you know, make plans, know that that's a requirement of yours. You can check it in at any office, but call ahead to make sure somebody's there and to set up an appointment. And Even if you live in Reno, you shoot a ram in Vegas, you can check it in Vegas, you can check it in Tonopah, you could bring it all the way back to Reno, as long as you stay within those 5 business days. So weekends and holidays do not count towards the counting of those 5 days. During your check-in process, we're going to be taking samples, and I think they either went over that or they're going to be going over that soon, but we're going to be taking some samples. We're going to be measuring your horns. We're also going to be plugging it with a unique seal that legitimizes that animal. Also during that, we'll be taking your information on the number of days you hunted and all that stuff, so you do not have to fill out your hunter questionnaire at the end of the season. This satisfies that requirement. So your taxidermy stub, I already mentioned, that's the third portion of your tag that accompanies your skull and cape to the taxidermist. We would also expect some part of your tag, which you're bringing your head in, probably have your taxidermy stub with you as well to check it in. We get some information, some data off that tag as well. So make sure you bring that with you, and that part goes to the taxidermist. Go ahead, Mike. So here's a list of multiple units within the state. If you see your unit that you have a tag for listed on there, and then the corresponding land management agency or controlling agency of that of your unit, they may have, and they do have, different rules and regulations. Some of you will have to go to a briefing by the Department of Defense, those kinds of things. But if you're hunting on one of these units, contact those agencies there to make sure you're abiding by their rules, because those are different than ours sometimes. So just check with it as far as driving, loaded guns, where you can hunt, where you can't hunt, those kinds of things. So please check in with those agencies for further information. And I think that covers mine, but I think I got some chat on something here.
Yeah, is there any questions that want to be divulged to the rest of the group? Joe and Tom from previous sections?
I think we've handled most of them. I would say carry on.
Well, there's a couple of questions about using the hood of your truck and
Okay.
using an ATV for arrest and stuff like that. So maybe
That's a great question. So the law says you cannot have a loaded weapon in or on a vehicle. So constructively, if you're using your truck, your ATV for arrest, that is unlawful, okay, by letter of the law. So it is recommended that you do not do that, even though it makes your shot better. Buy yourself a pair of shooting sticks or something, because that would cross the line and get you a ticket. So no leaning on the hood of your truck or across your ATV to help you steady the gun. That is a loaded weapon in or on a vehicle.
I guess, Mike, one more question for you. What would you like folks to do if they run across the trail camera in the field?
Just document it, GPS it, and then let us know about it as soon as you can. There are certain circumstances where they are legal, and you may come across some out there. There are within our agency and other agencies that are using them. They should be marked. But if you do find one, GPS it, take a picture, and then notify us as soon as possible, just so we can make sure everybody's playing by the rules. That cover it?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. So I'm the other Mike. My name is Mike Cox, statewide Bighorn Sheep Program Coordinator. Been around for a few years. So we're going to go over something really important that I hope you take away from tonight, which is aging and scoring. You saw some pictures of some ewes and rams. So this just tells you the 3 main categories of sheep that you're going to see out there. The ewes with their sickle-shaped horns, very small. You got immature rams with limited mass, And then you have the mature rams that you're all looking for. So just general categories. Going to go through a series of slides that are going to talk about the shape that's formed by the horns of different aged rams. This is a 3-year-old ram. And it's showing a trapezoid type shape. There's a lot of flare in those horns. And you can see that mass doesn't go that far. I'm gonna get my laser pointer here. That mass pretty much stops about a quarter of the way on that horn. Here's a 4-year-old. You're going to start seeing that trapezoidal shape box up. So you've got just a bit more mass carried down further down the horn toward the tip. And that's really the main differences of those middle-aged rams. All right, we jumped to an older ram. Now we're starting to see that box where you've got that mass of the horns that are pushing out from the skull, and it is carrying that mass over half, at least over half of the horn. Also look at how far that horn drops below the jawline. That was a 7-year-old. Here's a 10-year-old ram that's completely boxed. So it's got that mass that instead of having that young ram, it forms literally a box on the landscape when you're looking through your scope or your binos. Some of them have their lamp tips nearly still on their horn, and sometimes they're completely broomed off. So that kind of goes over overall shape, which gives you a really good indication of age and a little bit on score. 2 rams. Obviously, the one on the right is older. Some of the characteristics that you're looking for to separate the young and the old. This has a big, swollen Roman nose versus the younger ram that's got a more narrower nose. It's clean. That hasn't been involved with butt heading during the rut. You've got the mass on this ram carries almost all the way through, actually, and he's lost pretty much the entire yearling and part of the 2-year-old portion of that horn, which will get into aging. You can see how thin this young ram is, although and then you can see it still has its lamb tips at a young age. This is a really important diagram. So the horn is growing out of the skull and it keeps being pushed out. And so the oldest portion of the horn is out on the tip. Looks like this one actually has a little bit of its lamp tips missing, but that would be the oldest portion of that horn. You're going to have these striations on most horns, but you're looking for annuli that are laid down typically during the rut, and they're going to be deeper as you get older. And so you're going to see these faint 1, 2, maybe even 3 lines that go all the way around the circumference of the horn for the 2- and 3-year-olds. But once you get to 4 years of age, you're going to see probably the darkest and deepest annuli ring. And the rings are laid down because the ram is changing from hanging out and putting all of his energy into building a massive horn for the rut to when the rut happens, he shuts down distributing that energy, that food intake that he has, and it's going all into his rut behavior. There's many times where he's not feeding anywhere near what they are normally when the rut isn't happening. And so that's why these faint 2- and 3-year-old rings are faint, because they haven't really done much. They're not participating in the rut themselves. They're just sitting on the sidelines waiting. So you can see that deep fourth. Also, if you look at the mass, you pretty much have the same circumference girth from 4 years on all the way to the base of the skull. Here's some harvested rams to kind of go over where we showing that those annuli again. So he's got a little bit of his lamp tips missing. This is probably about where the yearling, about the length of a yearling horn. Here's where the 2-year-old ring is. 3-year-old's pretty deep, but you can see there's some pretty good rings that go seemingly around the entire horn. So here's the deepest 4-year-old ring, 5, and then 6. So this is a 6-year-old ram. Here's what everyone's going to be looking for. And it's not just looking at the horns. Obviously, we've got mass all the way through. He's broomed off his first year and portion of the 2. Lots of chips. But also look at his rump. So just like a lot of us that are getting up in age, our muscle definition is gonna be weaker, and so you're gonna see a more slanted, curved rump versus more rounded on those younger rams. Looking at a group of rams, hopefully you'll get a lot of opportunity to see a group like this. Obviously, you have to wait if you're going to pull the trigger on something till they clear. But certainly continue to be evaluating their horns, all the different angles, and which ram do you think has the biggest horns? This one's looks pretty nice, but you only have that front view. I would actually say probably this ram here looks like he's carrying his mass quite a ways down. But it's really nice to have rams of all ages so you can kind of get a better feel for the relative size to each other. All right, 2 rams. First glance, the one on the left obviously has bigger horns. So are you assuming the one on the right is younger? But when you look at all the characteristics, all the features, look at that slanted rump. And guess what? The one on the right has the same slanted rump. His muscle mass is weakening. Both these rams happen to be the same age. They're both 9 years old. So a lot of the genetics also can contribute. It's probably what's going on. The mass and the length is quite a bit less. but they're the same age. All right, we're going to use this ram for the next few slides to get into scoring, taking into account what constitutes a Boone and Crockett score. You've got base circumference with the tape going all the way around the base at the hairline. And then you have the 3/4 measurements that are equidistant, first quarter, second, third quarter. If you can visualize where that third quarter is on the horn by looking at that horn and dividing it up into fours, you want that third quarter to be as wide as possible. You can see here, that's probably the 3-year-old ring there, and his third quarter is going to be obviously below that, where it's going to be a little bit less, but you're probably going to have almost the exact same quarter measurements for the first and second, because he holds his mass really well. The tightness of the horns, or the wideness of the horns, can really also be quite different. This guy's got a pretty tight curl. It's actually a California Bighorn. Much more common to have a tight curl on our California Bighorn rams than deserts. This is probably about a softball size hole that you could stick a softball in. Some of the desert Bighorns, you might even be able to get a volleyball in them. This is really important, this line. This is the jaw line. And to be able to judge, is that horn dropping below or right at the jaw line? That will also add quite a bit of mass if it's dropping, and length to contribute to that score. So trying to give you some general metrics to look at the length of a horn and decide, is it a 150, 160, 170, maybe even a 180 class ram. So if this ram only had horn length to this yellow line, it'd be 30 inches. You can see relative to the jaw line that you're below, the tip of that horn would be at or below the jaw line. Animal with that type of horn length, with an average base and carrying its mass, would be about a 150 class. So this particular ram is a 33-inch horn, and that, again, with a typical mass on the base of the horns, is going to get you into that 160 class of a ram, Boone and Crockett score. Now, let's say you're looking at a ram that has the outside circumference of his horn, this green circle. First of all, he's got a full curl. He'd be pushing that tip into his eye. Also, you can see how far back that horn goes, and you can see how low that horn drops below the jawline. You probably could get close to dropping a volleyball into that ram curl. And again, that's probably going to result in a 170 class ram if you've got those characteristics. Okay, so that is all for aging and scoring, but we're going to come back to that with kind of a test and training at the very end. So I'm going to pass on this to Jason for going over hunting.
trying to get my video to work. Yeah, Jason Salisbury, stationed out of the Fallon office, and I manage area 18 and 20, 8 different desert bighorn sheep units. I guess the first thing is like, preparing your mind, preparing your body, making sure you have all the right gear, making sure your vehicle is, you're doing all your repairs now so that your vehicle is ready to go and you got good tires and all your equipment's just kind of ready. But, the mental, you're all hyped up about the hunt and all that, but, just being physically prepared to get up in the hills and hunt and be able to get to where the sheep want to be. And so right now would be a good time to start training, put a backpack on and go hike the block or go hike up in the hills a little bit, and just get training. And you might, wear out a pair of boots before the season starts. Just make sure your boots are, kind of broken in, ready to go, so you're not going to be all blistered up and that, just putting a brand new pair of boots on. Because a lot of that country in that south, with that rough rock, I mean, you'll basically, if you're hiking a lot, you'll wear out a pair of boots. Be proficient with your rifle or your bow, or have a backup plan. And you don't necessarily have to have the biggest caliber for sheep. I mean, they're a pretty small animal. You don't really have to have a 300 Win or anything big that you're just going to have your taxidermist want to stitch up a lot more. So if you have some of those other lower caliber guns that can still shoot far, bring those out and have another backup gun or something like that if it's not shooting right. Maps, GPS apps like Onyx are important to kind of know the area. Definitely important on the Air Force Base and looking at those boundaries. Those are definitely important, but kind of speak to past hunters, look at past locations of kills, look at water sites, knowing all that, knowing all the road access where you can, look from the road. All that's important as far as planning out your hunt. And that comes to the whole part of scouting, whether you're using trail cameras to August 1st, kind of knowing what's kind of in the area, talking to past hunters, and just kind of familiarizing yourself with areas that you can get into. A lot of places like on the Air Force Base, you can't get into, but maybe you'll some other hunters that have hunted in the past where you could talk to them and look at the maps with them on scouting out the area and kind of knowing what the population is. Talk to the area biologist, leave them a message, send an email, and send them maps and we'll send them back to you and we can mark up the maps. And, vehicle maintenance is definitely important, and having spare tires. A lot of those places, if you don't have access to OHV or you can't use them, it's important on those, lower the air pressure on the tires on some of those places so that you just don't beat yourself up on all those side roads just with the rocks and everything. And then kind of know what you have for cell coverage. Some areas you have pretty good cell coverage and other places you don't. And sometimes those in-reach devices and that you can communicate with each other, communicate with radios or anything to the other people that are scouting for you or looking over the country. Just kind of know what you're getting into. Headlamps and batteries, just being prepared with everything in your backpack, just in case, you have to stay the night or something. So you have enough, base layers and have extra batteries and batteries for your GPS to get back to your vehicle and everything like that. Cause some places you might be hiking all day and then coming out at night. Sharp knives for caping out that trophy. Just making sure you prepare it right and get it all cooled off, and sun protection, even when it's in November and December. Yeah, the sun is beating down, and lots of water. Hydrate yourself, keep yourself going. And the most important part is that those binos and that scope, and pack frame or backpacks. And, sheep are pretty easy as far as boning them out and putting the whole sheep. But you should have at least a buddy system to be able to have at least another guy. And coolers, ice, game bags, and plan for keeping meat and hide cold but dry so it doesn't spoil in that. If you can cape out the head and that to cool it off. If it, bring a bigger cooler. Sometimes it takes a big cooler to put the whole head and hide inside that. But a lot of times everything's pretty cold that time of year. Next slide. Yeah, and this is just a slide showing kind of like a rain event, but a lot of times in those November hunts and those December hunts, it might be rain, but a lot of times it's snow. So, and a lot of the country up in the north, even in the south, in those December hunts, I mean, it's the single digits. So just be prepared for, if you go out, just have a plan to have all the base layers, so you can strip off and put more clothes on, especially when you're sweating and going up in the hills. Next slide. The biggest thing on the hunting, depending on how many people you have scouting for you and looking at that, is that having the right optics. A lot of times just using those, using a tripod definitely steadies you a lot better. So like you're using, like I'll use like pan with the 15x56s or 10x42s and just cover the mountain. And that morning light, it definitely shows up sheep, waiting for that morning light, and just kind of covering all the rows that you can, as far as, ruling out different places, looking over a lot of sheep. Some places don't have a lot of sheep, so you might recognize if it's a shooter just like that, but give yourself some time to look over a lot of animals if you can, to see if that's the sheep you want. But just glass a lot of that country, that early morning light, getting the pockets. If it's nasty weather, those sheep just kind of go in and hide under places and that. And if you still want to be out there hunting it, look for those places that aren't windy and it's just kind of calm and nice, and just look into those little hidey holes. A lot of times you can glass so much from the road, but there's a lot of places you have to hike into to find some of those sheep. And just take your day pack and have everything to prepare to go in and look around a lot, and then come out. But those sheep definitely don't like, you want to find those sheep. If you're hunting on top looking down, you don't want them to see you, because they don't like anything above them. I mean, you can walk all day at a sheep from the bottom to the top. They don't really care, but they do care if you're looking down at them. They do kind of spook a little bit. Next slide. There's just a series of slides of with this, where sheep can just pretty much be anywhere they want to be. And it definitely does change. Like down south this year, we actually had some of those monsoons. And so sheep will be, in certain years where it's dry, and that sheep will be on some of those waters. There's years that you can just be right on the guzzlers because it's so dry. But other years, we get some of those rains. This is an example of one out in the flat, but you can look out in those hills and that, or in the valleys, and if it's green somewhere, those sheep will be down in those flats and those Joshua trees and those little valleys. They're just chasing green up. Next slide. And then other places where we have a lot of the pinyon juniper woodland and that, they'll get into some of that for thermal cover. Other years we have, pretty good pine nut crops. And so those sheep will go in, into those pine nuts, because everything goes after pine nuts, because it only happens every so many years. But so there's an example of just, making sure you get a view of the sheep. Here's one side view of it. I mean, if it was something you wanted to shoot, you could shoot it, but next slide. It'd be perfect on that one horn hunt. But it might not have been the trophy you wanted if you would have taken that first shot. So you only get them so often. Just sort through them and look at what you want. I mean, a lot of these places, we're pretty conservative on our numbers. And so there's a lot of sheep to look at. And so just take your time on hunting. And this is kind of the one horn ram legal definition. The shortest horn must be less than half the length of the longest horn. So this one would qualify under the shortest horn hunt that we have, that we offered this year. Next slide. And then report any sightings of domestic sheep or goats. If you have a GPS, take a coordinate. If you got pictures, take pictures. We're just always curious if there's anything wandering, whether it's domestic sheep, whether it's domestic goats. And that's just important. That's important to us to find out who owns them and if they're in the right spot or not in the right spot. If you're hunting sheep, they're normally in the wrong spot and they've gotten lost. This is an example of a hunting guide was in a deer hunt and was watching bighorn ram with some domestic sheep that kind of wandered off in that. And so it's always good to have video and have locations in that for us to kind of get our hands around what's going on and where it's at. Next slide. And then from time to time, a lot of times we're always screening for disease and different strains of MOV. A lot of times when you're bringing that sheep into us, we'll actually swab your sheep, but there's sometimes that we'll ask for samples ahead of time. Like if we want to get information of a particular unit, we'll ask for you to take samples. If it's too hard to take samples or you're too far back and you don't want to take them, that's fine. But if you have the means, you can take samples for us if we describe them, like with the trachea, with part of the left lung. If you have any concerns and you're opening up the cavity in that, a lot of times, if you're looking at the lung, we look for that, the pink colored lung that looks healthy, but then there's also sections of that that might be unhealthy, a little bit darker colored and all that. And so if we ask you for that and you see like healthy part and an unhealthy part, we'd probably want to take a piece of each so that we have that for a sample. Another thing we look for is the sinus tumor. And a lot of times we only can see that once you take it back to the taxidermist and they cut it off the bony core and that, and we can look at that sample wise. And then other times we'll have a disease event that happens. It might happen in September, October, and there's times when we will notify you if we know we have a current disease event, and we might ask for you to take more samples for us, or we'll try to find you and take the samples from you. And we will notify you, you have the option to give up your tag or continue to hunt or when the season opens. But that next slide. And that's it.
Thanks, Jason. So now we're going to go over trophy care. Let me pull up the PowerPoint for Travis Trzynski. Travis, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. So
All right.
take it away and I'll advance your slides.
Sounds good. My name's Travis Trzynski. I own True Obsession Outdoors. It's a taxidermy shop up in Spring Creek, Nevada, up here by Elko. Go ahead and hit the next slide. We're going to talk about trophy care, getting it ready for your taxidermist. The first point I really want to harp on is don't drag your sheep. Between sheep and antelope, their hair will fall out if you just look at it wrong. So if you're really dedicated about wanting to get that mount, do your best job in the field. Don't drag that. Take your time. This could be a once in a lifetime tag. So another thing, think about your poses beforehand. So before you field dress it, I would even say before you even start your hunt, think about what kind of pose you want and reach out to your taxidermist, talk to him, make sure it's a pose that, you know, he's comfortable with. He can tell you where to cut it, how he prefers it, all of that. These are just a few examples of different poses. The one here on the left is a half-life. Then we have a pedestal right there in the middle. And then on the far right is a wall pedestal. So go ahead and hit the next slide. Again, contact your taxidermist before your hunt. Talk to him, see how he wants it cut, any insights, get real familiar with it. Make sure that you do your part in the field to get that to your taxidermist in the best possible condition. Let's see here. These are just a couple different cuts. Again, talk to your taxidermist. One of these belly cut, that's more of a preference, like animal bedded down. It's a little bit easier for him to stitch and work with in that shape. The other one, the dorsal cut, that one goes from the back of the skull all the way down to where the white ring around the rump will be. And that's more for like a standing pose, because then he doesn't have to do any stitch work around the belly. And that's where you're going to see, you know, most of that mount is you're going to see it from looking up, you're going to see the belly of it. So you don't want all them stitch marks in there. And this is just a short description of how those cuts go. But again, talk to your taxidermist. He can talk to you more in depth, draw better diagrams, show you in person, things like that. So next slide. My favorite one. Shoulders, pedestal mounts. You can always change your mind in the field. Some people go into the field, they want a shoulder mount, they're dead set on it. Later on, they decide they want a pedestal mount. Then their taxidermist tells them, you don't have enough cape for a pedestal mount. So that's why I harp on everybody to make your circle cut all the way at the back hips. So that way there's more than enough skin to do your mount. You know, there's nothing worse, and it happens every year. People will bring in a mount, they want a good shoulder mount, and it's cut right in front of the shoulder. It's just like, we can always cut off the excess, but we can't make them grow. Exactly. So next slide. Care for a European mount. This one, if you just like, you know, the white bone look, I would strongly suggest that you take the time in the field to cut it out for a full body mount, because it's very difficult to come by bighorn sheep capes, and there's a lot of people out there willing to buy them. Sometimes they'll even sell as high as $1,500. So that could be a pretty big chunk of change if you only want a European mount. So I would say save that cape. You never know who might want it. You might be able to pay for your entire hunt off of it. So next slide. All right, things to remember. Sharp knife. Sheepskin is very, very thin. So keep a sharp knife. Take your time. Be very careful, because once you make one mistake, it's easier to make another mistake, and then you just keep hacking holes in it, and then they get really hard to repair. So take your time. Think about that while you're hunting too. You know, if you see one at last light and it's really cold out and you know you're going to be cold and miserable on that side of the mountain, maybe you just wait until the morning to take that shot. These are all things to think about when it comes to that. Keep your cape clean. Go back. Keep your cape clean as possible. So like when you get it caped out, don't roll it around in the dirt. You know, keep the blood off of it, because that blood's going to stain the hair. Keep frozen plastic jugs in your ice chest as opposed to just regular ice, because then your cape's going to get wet and that becomes a cesspool for bacteria, which could also ruin your cape. And then get it frozen as soon as possible and get it to your taxidermist. All right, next slide. Again, things to avoid: getting blood on the hair. It's going to stain your cape, so try to avoid that best you can. When making dorsal cuts, choose one side of the mane. Don't go down the middle of it. When you make your leg cuts, you'll be able to see there's that white hair that comes to, I think it's brown. I'm colorblind, so there's a little cowlick on the black back of the animal's leg. So make your cut straight up that cowlick. And do not salt your cape. Most taxidermists really do not want you to salt your cape, because if you have chunks of meat between the skin and that salt, all that bacteria is still going to grow in there and it's going to rot away at that hair. So next slide. Insurance policies. So again, always cut extra, watch a bunch of videos beforehand, talk to your taxidermist, take your time. And then there's some stuff out there called Hide Lock, made from velvet antler technologies. It's got alcohol and some oils in it. And basically what it does is it kills all the bacteria, stops the decomposition, and that will make sure that the hair doesn't slip out. And what I mean by slip out is if hair's starting to rot, like if your cape's starting to rot, you'll go to pet it basically, and all that hair will just fall out, and that epidermis layer, that first layer of skin, will come out with it, and it's pretty much garbage at that point. And there's also denatured alcohol, which you can get at most hardware stores, Walmart, places like that. That'll kill the bacteria too. You just douse it with those products, and that'll kill all that bacteria. It'll kind of set that hair. You still want to get it frozen into your taxidermist ASAP, but these are just, you know, sub $50 products that you can take with you, that you can put in a pack, that will ensure there's no rot damage to your cape. I sell it on my website at trueobsessionoutdoors.com. You can use our coupon code SheepHunt22. I'll get you 10% off of the Hide Lock, and that just cheap insurance. Next slide. Yeah. Good luck to all you guys. Hopefully you kill some big ones. And then this is how you can reach me if you're interested in seeing some more work or asking any more questions. I know this is a pretty quick presentation, so any of you want to reach out to me, feel free. Here's my phone number. You can call, text me. My email is just trueobsessionoutdoors@gmail.com, and then the social media sites. And that's it.
Thanks, Travis.
All right, thank you.
Joe and Tom, any particular questions on trophy care?
I'm not seeing a whole lot specific to trophy care.
No, I think everybody's got it.
All right. Well, we are now at our little training session. If we were live, I'd tell people, let's go outside and set up your spotting scopes. But we're virtual, so we're going to test your skills of what you know and what you may have learned tonight in guesstimating the age and score of 5 different rams. And I'm going to have Jason help me with trying to remember or remind all of us some of the characteristics, some of the features that each of these rams are going to have. To allow you to estimate the age and score. So if you want to put it on a piece of paper, or you could even type it in the Q&A. Once I'm done, once Jason and I are done kind of going over, it'll be a good test. So most of these, we're going to have a front and a side view, and then we do have some actual rams in the field that were harvested, and some photos that were taken by hunters prior to them harvesting. So our first ram, and I'm just going to remind people of things you need to be looking at. Again, what we learned first off was, what sort of shape are the horns forming? Is that trapezoidal form shape, or are we getting more of a box? How far down does the horn mass carry from the base of the horns? Is it a wide or is it a tight curl on the horns? where is that main four-year ring annuli? That typically is the darkest and the deepest. How far below the jawline is that horn dropping? Are you looking at a 3/4, 7/8, or a full curl on your ram when you see that side view? And certainly that part of that is going to be how much brooming has already occurred, which can take off several inches of that horn. So take what you can get from each view, don't make it up, and hopefully that ram will continue to move and you can see all sides. So in this first ram, not carrying a ton of mass, does have a little bit of trapezoidal shape. Anything to add, Jason?
It's doesn't look like a shooter to me, but it could be a shooter for somebody. I don't know.
Yeah, something that I think we all find ourselves when we're out there in the field, and maybe your first hunt and maybe your third hunt, but you might be a length guy, you may be a mass guy, you may be, I want to see a badass ram with busted up nose, Roman nose, whatever. But I think each of us, we're going to have a ram that just, that's the one, and it doesn't have to be the largest or the longest. Okay, here's the side view. I would say here's probably about the jawline. So this ram is dropped a little bit, but not as much as some. This is probably your 3-year-old ring. So keep that in mind. And anything else before we unveil its score and age? Anything to help the guys out, Jason?
Can't really think of anything. I mean, looking at that 3-year ring, then you're looking at that double ring, which would be your next year. And then, so, looking at the age.
So let's see what it is.
Some things.
Oh, and then we have a back view. Back views can be misleading. Every ram from the rear is going to look huge. But I think you really want to try to do what you can to guesstimate the bases. We've got some units that a 13.5-inch base is going to be average. And then we've got some units that you'll definitely have the opportunity to see a 16-inch base. Huge difference. But unless they're side by side, it's really tough to know that mass. All right, well, here we go. It's a 5-year-old, about 150. So if we go back to that side view, yep. So we got the 3-year-old, the 4-year ring, and there's the 5. And he's probably about a 3/4 curl. And by the way, that was a desert bighorn.
Yeah, the Mr. Reed, they guessed it right at 150. So he's going good.
Excellent. All right, so this is California bighorn. We typically see a tighter curl. Just looking at the front, he's definitely carrying more mass than the first ram. But he's got a lot of brooming going on that we can see. But we're definitely going to want to look at that side view. So you can see how much he's lost on the tips. Again, we've got that jaw line about right there. He's just not dropping down. So that's going to give you a good guesstimate of length. He is carrying mass pretty well though. And then let's think about where that 3-4-year-old ring is. We'll get a rear view. And Jason, is it pretty common that you're going to see the annuli more pronounced from the rear?
Yeah, I mean, you see it. I mean, I look at it side when people bring everything in, but yeah, it is more pronounced from that back and a little bit to the side. As far as looking how, deep the rings and the color and that, there's a little more color on it. Just, I think, because the sun doesn't hit it as much too, so.
Yeah, and so, just if you look at the rings are there, but they're not prominent, but man, when you look from the back, they definitely stick out. So that's one other thing that, if you really want to harvest a 10-year-old ram, that's your goal, then you definitely want that back view.
And you typically have a difference between, I would say, like from Tonopah north, where we typically on our Californias and our deserts, we broom a lot more. Sometimes we carry, pretty decent mass or really good mass, but we typically broom a lot more on the north than we do the south. South will usually have, Southern Nevada will usually have longer lengths, and they'll sometimes carry their lamb tips a lot more than the north does.
That's a great point, Jason. Yeah, and if you're waiting for, a ram that's got lamb tips when you're hunting, say around Highway 50, those units,
Yeah,
a very long time.
So I mean, a lot of times we carry, in some places we carry a lot of mass, and so if you get a sheep that's in that 35-inch range and not necessarily something down south that's like a 37, that 35 goes a long way with carrying mass.
Yeah. So 155 class, but he was 10 years old. He didn't have the length because it was broomed off. But still a really nice ram. I mean, I myself, I'd rather have an older ram than a younger, huge ram. He probably is not going to have too many years left, and you took him out at the end of his life, and better you than a predator or Mother Nature. All right. Third ram. These are actually real photos taken by the hunter from last year. Took a real nice ram. Just right off the bat, definitely has got a lot of mass that's carrying down 3/4 of that horn.
And he's got a lot of opening in between his horn and his eyeball. There's a pretty good space there as far as out.
Yep. Another thing right off the bat, I mean, you can see the annuli, but just looking at that rump, he's definitely an older ram. This is where that mass really, again, from that rear view, that back view. Now he doesn't show well, and this could be an actual view where you've got poor light, it's fuzzy, got long distance, and some of those rings are just not showing up well in terms of getting an age. This is a bit deceiving to try to detect how low does that ram drop below the jaw, because you've got an angle at it. But as Jason said, it's a big opening, wide flare and wide curl. So here we go. That's a bruiser. 8 years old, can't beat that. 175. That's going to be probably top 10 desert ram in most years. So you can see he had mass and length. And that's what it's going to take to get over 170.
And it's deceiving sometimes with those rams that have mass and carrying it, how much length they actually have. A lot of times it's just deceiving that you look at them and it's like this, but when they're coming out and when they have some of that space in between, just having that curve around and that it just gives them that length, where sometimes it's deceiving with masked rams that ram's actually 36 inches long.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the side view and you might think it's low 30s. Now this one's going to be tricky. Let's say this is all you've got. He's bedded down. You can't move. All you've got is this rear view. Yeah, you've got a couple annuli, but boy, there's just not a lot to give you there to give you pretty accurate estimate. Now he's given a little bit more of a side view, but with the sun and some rams, sometimes their horns are, they just don't have striations. They just don't show the annuli rings well. You're going to have to give this one a lot more time. Hopefully he'll move and give you a better perspective. Maybe the light will change. I mean, you look at this harvested ram with the hunter, and that's a trapezoidal shape. And you're thinking, God, is that a young ram? If that would have given you that view before you got into position. You're not seeing the annuli well, and you rarely do from the front. Wow. Would have never guessed that that'd be that much mass on that ram's horns from those other views. You've got to be patient. You've got to watch. Let that ram give you all the angles possible. And even in hand, it's got tough. It's tough to look at the annuli. He's got a ton of brooming. This is probably 3 years of age right there. So, yep. What does everybody think? Age and score. Here we go. He's pushing 170 and extremely old, 12 years old. Heck of a trophy. Doesn't have a ton of horn length as we knew, but it's got pretty good horn bases, 15 and a half. All right, here's our last ram. It's a Rocky Mountain Bighorn ram from Nevada. Just initial view, looks like a pretty nice ram. Again, you've got the rear, gives you a little bit better ability to look for those annuli. What do you think that is? Really dark. Is that mass still growing after that ring toward the base of the skull? Kind of tough to see from this angle. Yeah, you're looking at probably maybe even a double ring here at that age. And that's going to happen. You're going to see that it's not uncommon. That probably is not two separate age rings. But he's got a lot of mass. It's tough to judge. Does he have 16-inch bases or something less? Or is he more like 14? Some people will use the eye width. And I think we've heard that maybe a 3 eye width would be in that 14.5 to 15-inch base. So maybe use that as a metric. What do we think? Nice mature ram. Great horn length, almost 35, but really deceiving. Less than 14-inch base. Yeah, it definitely looked bigger than that from the side, but gorgeous ram. All right, well, that concludes the training of taking your skills and thinking what each of the age and scores would be. So let me put back up our main seminar slides. And so Sarah is going to provide us with some final thoughts.
Yeah, so we just have a couple of things to do, final thoughts, tips, reminders. So as you see, this is a pretty nice picture after the hunt. So once you harvest your ram, you're likely going to want to commemorate that experience with photos. So a couple of tips on making those photos good quality. You can use a rubber band to keep the animal's mouth closed, and that'll keep the tongue and any blood that may be coming out inside the mouth. And then also be mindful of your background. These hunts take place in some pretty amazing places. So using the scenery to your advantage can really enhance that photo. So for example, don't take your picture underneath the only power line in the mountain range, unless you're really good with Photoshop. With respect to caping your ram, remember to talk to your taxidermist in advance. And if you're not comfortable doing that, you can take it to your taxidermist to have them do. And Travis can correct me if that's incorrect. And then finally, go on your hunt prepared for success. So make sure you have everything you're going to need to pack out a 200 to 250 pound animal, such as a pack frame, meat bags, and enough hands and backs to carry everything out, such as your equipment, the meat, the head, and the hide. And if you want to go to the next slide, Mike. A big reminder, after your hunt, you, the tag holder, need to check your ram in person within 5 business days of harvest. And this will involve having a metal plug permanently put into one of the horns and having some measurements taken and information recorded by biologists. And you can do this at any NDOW office, but please call ahead and make an appointment. And I noticed in the Q&A, there was talk about the Eureka office. Currently, there is not much in the way of staff in Eureka, so other offices would be better bets to go to. You will need to only bring the head and the skull with you, along with your taxidermy stub. The tag will stay behind with the meat. And go on to the next slide. Mike can take over.
All right. we used to send people out with a paper form. And we've now got an electronic form. We call our hunter observation form. And in fact, that's a QR code. Stick your camera up to the screen of your mobile device with your photo camera open. That'll allow you to download that app onto your phone. And we also provided that in the information that we shared with you on the seminar. But we really would love to have, during your scouting trip and during your hunting trip, observations that classifying your groups that you see, also helping identify, did you see any domestic sheep? Did you see any wild sheep that looked sick? Did they have a snotty nose? Was there a guttural cough? Was it a violent cough where their head actually almost went to the ground? Things like that are really critical to document. And I'm going to pull up real quick the actual form online. So this is the form that you'll be able to fill out on your phone. If you open your phone and have this app open before you lose cell coverage, you'll be able to enter your data. But if you don't open it, and then you finally are out, you see a group, you see something you need to document, and you lost cell coverage, then it won't work. But please take some notes and try to, when you get back into cell coverage, fill it out. Want your name, was it scouting or hunting trip, the unit you're in, the date, kind of the general geographic name. Is it a drainage peak? Is there a guzzler nearby that has a name? And if you've got a ram group, how many mature rams, how many young rams? Really important is the ewe and lamb groups, if you happen to see those. And if you think you're good enough to identify lambs separately from the young ewes, then give it a go and record that. Here's the question for, did you happen to see any domestic sheep in your unit while you're scouting or hunting? And then did you see any sick sheep? What sort of behavior did they have? Did you find a fresh carcass, which could be an indication of maybe a disease event that just started? And then lastly, any good information from the guzzler that is concerning? Is it nearly dry, or some other damage to it? So not only fill this out, but hopefully when you get back, as soon as you get back, let us know what's going on. And then you just hit the submit button that goes into the cloud, and we'll have access to that information. Now, a big part of the use of this observation form this year is we're starting a pilot project, kind of a citizen science project of Bighorn monitoring. And we actually, if you sign up as a volunteer, we can actually use your hours in the field, the miles that it took to go from your home to areas that you're scouting and hunting, to match in order to get federal dollars. So the game division and the habitat division we have multi-million-dollar federal aid grants that we're getting. And most of those big grants require a 3-to-1 match. So for every $300 that we get from the federal government for wildlife management, we have to come up with $100. And so in the case of a $3 million grant, we need to find $1 million of match. Could be in the form of donations, or in this case, sweat equity. So some of you may have already received an email asking you to sign up as a volunteer. And each time you fill out an observation form, then you're able to record the amount of hours it took to get to wherever you took that observation at. And I can't tell you how valuable all of you are. Not only is it an awesome hunt, but you're worth $36 an hour to us and our federal aid grant. And your miles, 56 cents a mile. And all that needs to be documented, but you can really help us secure that $1 million of non-federal match by signing up as a volunteer and entering in your hours and the miles you drove when you get back home. So look, if you haven't already received it, look for an email over the next 2 weeks that will give you instructions to sign up as a volunteer online. And we also have our volunteer coordinators, their email and their phone numbers will be in the email, so that if you have trouble signing up as a volunteer, you can get a hold of them. And then there'll also be attached on that email instructions of how to fill out the timesheet and your miles that you've driven both out and back from your trip. So that is all I have, but I would like for Tom and Joe, if you've got some great questions, maybe they've been asked by multiple people, to share some of the questions and answers to the group before we sign off.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention, some of the questions kind of referred to it, is please check in with your office, especially in the field offices. There may not be staff available. We could be flying in a different area that week and we're only dealing with a couple folks. So, you know, your regional offices, Vegas, Reno, Elko, along with Ely and Winnemucca and Fallon will have staff pretty much available each day, but please check into your field offices before you just drive there.
Yes, and good example is Hunter and Daniel. They've got small offices and there may not be anyone around. Any other questions that you wanted to share with the larger group that came in?
I think a lot of them were pretty specific, not a ton of questions for the group, I don't think. I just hope everybody has an awesome hunt and time and, you know, trophies in the
Eye of the beholder.
that's your thing is, you know, don't worry about what it scores necessarily. It's what you think a trophy is. And, you know, we talked a lot about old rams and big rams and scores. And, you know, I passed up bigger rams when I harvested my ram and shot the one I wanted. So don't get too wrapped up in it and don't be in a huge hurry is the thing I would say. It's a long season. I know people go out and scout and they have their eyeballs on a certain ram or a certain couple rams or something, but you know, most of you guys and gals have waited years for tags. I think I hunted 10 days. Enjoy the hunt. Don't stress out. It's an awesome experience. Don't think you got to go out opening morning and get in a foot race to shoot the ram you want. If you do, that's awesome. But man, just enjoy this hunt. Don't let it stress you out. It's supposed to be fun and it's a cool opportunity. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
And the only thing I would have to add, and I'm not going to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but when it comes to, I've had actually some hunters, some older hunters and that actually went and hunted by themselves. And one comes to mind where he couldn't get anybody to go with him. And it was pretty sad because he went by himself and he harvested his ram. And at the same time, he was having a heart attack right by his ram. He had nobody with him. He tried to call somebody and they couldn't like locate him. And I mean, he was happy that he had killed his ram, but at the same time, with medical care, he could have been saved. And it's just one of those. I think it's great. It's the best thing you can do. At least have another buddy with you hunting, and maybe not hunt solo. That just comes to mind. And it was it was a sad deal. But I didn't mean to be negative on anything, but I just have a buddy to hunt with, I guess, my big thing.
Enjoy, be safe, and be successful. Anyone else? All right, well, good luck. Look for that email if you haven't received it on signing up as a volunteer. If you got questions, a lot of our biologists, they know that they're going to get phone calls. And so don't be bashful to try to pick their brain a little bit, but definitely get your scouting in. All right, well, thanks everyone.